Princess Catherine entered the reception hall, noticed Camilla waiting near the greeting line, and quietly chose not to acknowledge her. There was no handshake, no traditional greeting, and no brief exchange of polite words. Only silence, a composed expression, and a decision that instantly shifted the atmosphere throughout the room. Before we explore what this moment could mean for the royal family, be sure to subscribe so you never miss another update. Catherine never hurried. She never hesitated. She walked with the same calm confidence that had carried her through years of royal responsibility. Yet this time, her composure seemed stronger than any spoken response. The Windsor Event, a formal royal occasion designed to present unity before distinguished guests, senior members of the royal family, and palace officials, had been organized to demonstrate stability after weeks of private tension. The receiving line, where members of the royal family traditionally welcome guests one by one, followed long-established protocol. Everyone standing nearby understood the significance of what had just happened. Catherine had not forgotten royal etiquette. She had simply chosen not to follow that particular tradition. Camilla waited for the familiar gesture. When it never came, the Queen Consort's expression changed almost instantly. She had expected courtesy. Instead, she received silence. William noticed everything before anyone else could react. Without drawing attention to himself, he quietly stepped closer to Catherine. Not to create drama, but because he understood this decision came from something much deeper than a brief uncomfortable moment. He recognized the controlled sadness behind her calm expression. King Charles noticed it as well. Slowly lowering the program in his hands, he looked across the room and immediately realized the family tension had followed them into public view. As monarch, he was responsible for protecting both the institution and its public image. In that instant, he sensed that control was slipping away. He remained silent. That silence made the room feel even heavier. Catherine continued walking with quiet dignity. But the impact of her decision remained behind her. Guests exchanged cautious glances. Palace officials held polite smiles that suddenly seemed impossible to maintain. Camilla remained standing beside the receiving line, visibly uncomfortable after the greeting that never happened. William stayed close beside Catherine, making one message unmistakably clear. This had not been accidental. And Catherine would not face the consequences alone. Charles understood there would soon be difficult questions. Catherine had not ignored Camilla without reason. To understand why one missed greeting carried such extraordinary significance, we must return to the events that happened before Windsor. Behind that single silent moment stood four people carrying very different emotions. Catherine was not simply a princess choosing to skip a greeting. Camilla was not merely a queen consort expecting royal courtesy. William was not only a husband observing from nearby. And King Charles was not simply a monarch trying to preserve appearances. Each of them arrived at Windsor determined to protect something important. By the end of the evening, each realized that something deeply personal had been exposed. Long before anyone noticed the missed greeting, Catherine was already carrying emotional weight. Weeks of uncomfortable private conversations with Camilla had left a lasting impression, one she had quietly hidden behind duty and composure. Camilla arrived with a different expectation. She hoped to receive public acknowledgement from Catherine because, within royal life, hierarchy represents the visible order of respect and position inside the family. At Windsor, that greeting represented far more than ordinary politeness. It symbolized recognition. It would reassure guests, palace officials, and senior royals that Camilla's position remained secure and publicly respected. William sensed the tension before Catherine even reached the receiving line. Watching her approach, he recognized the difficult choice she faced. She was being asked to balance royal responsibility with personal dignity. He wanted to support her. Yet he also understood that any obvious reaction from him could transform quiet discomfort into public controversy. King Charles observed both women carefully. As both monarch and father, he knew how important that single moment had become. The royal family had worked hard to present a united image. One visible disagreement could easily expose weeks of hidden tension. Camilla slowly extended her hand. A nearby palace official noticed the movement. Everything appeared ready for the expected greeting. Then Catherine calmly walked past. Camilla quietly lowered her hand again. For one brief second, she managed to maintain her smile. But the disappointment reached her eyes before she could conceal it. Catherine felt the weight of that moment as well. There was no satisfaction. No feeling of triumph. only the quiet relief that comes from no longer pretending everything is unchanged. William remained beside her, silent, steady, supportive. King Charles lowered his gaze, realizing there was no simple solution left. Catherine's decision had not begun at Windsor. Camilla knew it. William suspected it. And Charles feared it. Somewhere before this royal gathering, words had been spoken that Catherine could neither forget nor ignore. The answer to Windsor's silence had begun weeks earlier, inside a much smaller room, where one carefully delivered sentence changed everything. The moment everyone would later remember did not happen in front of cameras, distinguished guests, or formal ceremonies. It happened behind closed palace doors. Several weeks before the Windsor event, members of the royal family gathered for a private rehearsal dinner at St. George's Chapel. The evening was intended to prepare everyone for the upcoming royal occasion and reinforce a sense of unity. Instead, one quiet conversation changed everything. During the gathering, Camilla made a brief remark about Catherine's future role within the family. The words were calm. They were measured. But Catherine understood exactly what they implied. Camilla gently said, "Respect is earned before it is received." She never raised a voice. She didn't need to. St. George's Chapel, one of the most historic royal churches inside Windsor Castle, has long been associated with important royal ceremonies and family occasions. The rehearsal dinner was meant to strengthen relationships before the public event. Instead, it exposed emotions that had remained hidden for far too long. Catherine immediately understood the deeper meaning behind the comment. To her, it was never simply about respect. It was about belonging. It felt as though her place within the future of the monarchy had quietly been questioned. William noticed the change in Catherine almost immediately. He saw her expression grow quieter. He noticed the way she withdrew from the conversation without drawing attention to herself. Later that evening, in private, William gently asked what had happened. For the first time, Catherine repeated Camilla's exact words. She spoke calmly, but the disappointment behind her voice was impossible to miss. William listened carefully. He understood why the comment had affected her so deeply. Catherine's position beside him had been built through years of dedication, responsibility, sacrifice, and public service. To hear those efforts reduced to a single remark left a lasting wound. King Charles noticed enough to realize something had changed. Although he hadn't heard every word, he saw Catherine become unusually quiet while Camilla appeared completely unaffected. Choosing not to interrupt, Charles hoped the uncomfortable moment would quietly disappear on its own. Instead, his silence allowed the misunderstanding to grow. A rehearsal dinner is normally intended to prepare the family for an important royal occasion so everyone appears confident and united before the public. This rehearsal achieved the opposite. It quietly showed Catherine that some emotions could no longer be ignored. Camilla believed she had simply expressed her opinion. For Catherine, the words remained with her long after the evening ended. She carried them through the following days, and eventually into Windsor itself. By the time she reached the receiving line, every expected smile felt less like courtesy, and more like pretending. William sensed she had finally reached her emotional limit. Charles quietly feared the unresolved tension would return when the family appeared together again. So when Catherine finally stood before Camilla at Windsor, she was not reacting to one brief encounter. She was responding to weeks of silent disappointment that had never truly been addressed. Some confrontations begin with raised voices. Others begin with complete silence. This one began with a single step. Catherine approached the receiving line with calm confidence, William only a short distance behind her. King Charles watched quietly from across the hall while Camilla stood waiting with a practiced smile. Then Catherine paused. She looked directly toward Camilla, and chose not to extend her hand. Instead, she offered only the slightest respectful nod before continuing forward. That was all. Yet in that single moment, the receiving line, the formal area where members of the royal family traditionally welcome guests in order, became the center of the evening's biggest discussion. Every expected gesture carried meaning. A handshake would have suggested harmony. A warm smile would have implied forgiveness. A brief conversation would have signaled that whatever had happened weeks earlier had been left behind. But Catherine chose otherwise. She quietly continued walking, carrying her composure with her while leaving an unmistakable message behind. Camilla softly spoke Catherine's name. Not loudly. Not publicly. just quietly enough that those closest to them noticed. For one brief moment, the Queen Consort's smile remained unchanged. Then it slowly faded. She had expected the greeting that would reassure everyone watching. Instead, she found herself standing alone before dozens of silent witnesses. Catherine understood that guests, palace officials, and senior members of the royal family would notice what had happened. But pretending everything was normal had become more difficult than remaining silent. William walked beside her without drawing unnecessary attention. He never reached for her hand. He never interrupted. He simply remained close enough to show his support. He understood that if he openly defended Catherine, the moment might grow into public confrontation. Yet standing too far away would leave her facing the situation alone. His quiet presence achieved exactly what he intended. King Charles watched the tension spread across the room. For a brief moment, he leaned slightly toward one of his senior palace officials, considering whether to intervene. Then he stopped. Any attempt to correct the situation publicly would only attract greater attention. Palace officials, responsible for coordinating royal events and maintaining smooth ceremony, suddenly found themselves unable to restore the atmosphere. Some moments cannot be managed through protocol. Charles understood the seriousness immediately. The royal family had gathered at Windsor to demonstrate unity after weeks of private strain. Instead, everyone present had witnessed visible distance between two senior members of the family. Camilla glanced once more toward the king, hoping for reassurance. He remained completely still. Catherine continued forward without looking back. William stayed quietly beside her. Behind them, Camilla remained standing with wounded pride hidden beneath careful composure. Charles already knew this moment would not end inside the reception hall. Before the evening was over, questions would have to be answered. And for the first time, Catherine would finally explain the reason behind her silence. Once the public smiles disappeared, Windsor became a very different place. The polished language of royal duty faded. The carefully rehearsed expressions disappeared. Inside a quiet private room, Camilla finally asked the question everyone had been waiting for. Why had Catherine chosen not to greet her? This was no longer about appearances. It was about honesty. Camilla closed the door behind them before Catherine could leave. Her voice remained calm, but every word reflected the disappointment of someone who had just experienced a very public rejection. She asked Catherine why she had chosen that particular moment, at that important royal gathering, to leave her standing alone before guests and family members. A private reception room at a royal event is normally where difficult conversations are settled away from public attention. This time, however, the room offered no easy solution. Catherine remained composed before quietly answering. Respect cannot be expected in public when it has been forgotten in private. The sentence was gentle, but its meaning was unmistakable. Catherine never raised a voice. She never allowed emotion to take control. Instead, she spoke with the calm confidence of someone who had carried disappointment for far too long. Camilla tried to defend herself. She reminded Catherine that royal position deserved acknowledgement. Within the monarchy, rank determines official position and ceremonial responsibility. But Catherine made one thing perfectly clear. Status alone could never replace kindness. She calmly reminded Camilla of the conversation during the rehearsal dinner at St. George's Chapel. The room immediately fell silent. No further explanation seemed necessary. The memory itself answered the question. Camilla suddenly found herself with very little to say. Not because Catherine had argued, but because she had finally spoken the truth she had kept inside for weeks. A few moments later, William heard voices from outside the room. He entered quietly and took his place beside Catherine. He did not interrupt. He did not answer for her. He simply stood there, making his support impossible to overlook. Camilla immediately understood what that silent gesture meant. Catherine was no longer facing the situation by herself. William had not entered to rescue her. He had entered to stand beside her. That difference mattered. The royal family has often survived difficult moments by encouraging everyone to move forward without revisiting painful conversations. This time was different. Catherine had refused to pretend everything was fine when it clearly was not. William understood that her decision was never about creating conflict. It was about protecting her own dignity. Only minutes later, King Charles was informed that the private conversation had taken place. As palace officials quietly repeated what had been said, the king's expression grew more thoughtful. He realized the balance had shifted. Camilla had asked for recognition. Catherine had asked for respect. And those two things were no longer being viewed as the same. One missed greeting had forced the royal family to confront a question they could no longer avoid. The issue was no longer whether Catherine had broken royal protocol. It had become something much deeper. Who had allowed trust to break first? By the time the private conversation ended, the atmosphere inside Windsor had changed completely. Guests continued smiling. The music played softly. Royal staff carried on with the evening as though everything remained perfectly normal. But beneath the polished surface, everyone knew something important had shifted. Camilla quietly left the reception area before the final introductions had concluded. She entered a nearby waiting room and sat in silence, carefully removing her gloves one finger at a time. The simple gesture revealed more emotion than any public statement ever could. Outside the room, palace officials worked quickly to calm growing speculation. They described the missed greeting as a simple misunderstanding. But the explanation failed to convince those who had witnessed the moment themselves. No official wording could erase what dozens of guests had already seen. Catherine had walked past Camilla without offering the expected greeting. That single image had already become more powerful than any explanation. Meanwhile, Catherine remained beside William. Her expression stayed calm. But inside, she felt emotionally exhausted. Remaining silent had finally allowed her to express what words never could. Even so, honesty carried its own weight. William immediately noticed the tiredness behind her composed appearance. Leaning slightly closer, he quietly reminded her that she did not owe an explanation to anyone who already understood the truth. His words brought reassurance rather than encouragement for conflict. He wanted Catherine to know she no longer had to carry the burden alone. King Charles reacted quickly once the whispers reached him. Recognizing the seriousness of the situation, he requested a private family meeting before the evening officially ended. Such meetings allow senior members of the royal family to discuss sensitive matters away from guests, cameras, and public attention. This conversation could no longer be postponed. Charles understood why. The monarchy depends upon the appearance of unity. Yet that appearance had weakened the moment Catherine quietly walked past Camilla. He also realized Camilla's disappointment would not disappear overnight. She had not simply missed a greeting. She had experienced a public reminder that respect cannot be secured by position alone. Catherine never viewed the evening as a victory. William never treated it as one either. King Charles certainly did not dismiss it as a minor breach of etiquette. Everyone closest to the situation understood the same reality. The missed greeting had revealed emotions the palace could no longer quietly ignore. Before the royal family could decide what message the public would eventually hear, Charles knew he first needed an honest conversation with Catherine herself. Without palace advisors, without ceremony, and without anyone else speaking on her behalf. For all the attention surrounding the Windsor event, the true turning point came only after the guests had gone. King Charles quietly asked Catherine to meet him in a private room. There were no palace officials.
No advisors.
No members of the family waiting nearby. Only a father, a king, and the woman whose silence had become the biggest story of the evening. Charles entered first but remained standing. He understood that this conversation could no longer be avoided. The missed greeting was not simply an uncomfortable social moment. It had revealed a deeper wound inside the family that protocol alone could never repair. A few moments later, Catherine entered the room. She appeared calm, yet noticeably tired. Years of royal responsibility had taught her how to remain composed before the public. But this evening had demanded more than composure. Royal protocol provides guidance on greetings, ceremonies, and public conduct. It cannot, however, erase personal disappointment. Catherine quietly explained her decision. She told Charles her silence had never been intended as an act of rebellion. It was not about pride. And it was never meant to embarrass Camilla. It was about protecting her own self-respect after words that had remained with her ever since the rehearsal dinner. She repeated the remark she had never forgotten. Respect is earned before it is received. Those words had stayed with her, not because they were spoken loudly, but because they had made her feel as though years of dedication had been quietly dismissed. Catherine admitted she had tried to move beyond the conversation. She had continued attending engagements. She had fulfilled every royal responsibility expected of her. She had smiled whenever required. Yet the disappointment had never truly disappeared. Instead, it slowly became impossible to ignore. King Charles listened without interrupting. As Catherine spoke, he remembered the rehearsal dinner. He remembered noticing the unusual silence afterward. Most of all, he remembered choosing not to intervene. At the time, he believed remaining silent would preserve harmony. Now he realized that silence had simply transferred the burden onto Catherine. The institution had asked her to represent unity, without protecting her from unnecessary hurt. That realization weighed heavily on him. Catherine looked toward the king and spoke with quiet certainty. She assured him she would always remain loyal to the crown. She would continue serving the royal family with dedication. But she could no longer pretend warmth where trust had been damaged. Charles never asked her to apologize. Instead, he quietly accepted her words. That silent understanding carried more meaning than any formal speech. When Catherine left the room, she remained emotionally tired. But she no longer felt unheard. Charles stayed behind for several moments, reflecting on everything he had learned. Deep down, he understood the next challenge would not remain inside palace walls. By morning, the entire country would be discussing what had happened at Windsor. The following morning, the royal family no longer controlled the story. Before any official statement could be released, images from the Windsor event had already captured public attention. One simple moment was everywhere. Catherine walking past Camilla without offering the expected greeting. It was quiet. It was brief. Yet it spoke louder than any carefully prepared speech. Catherine saw the newspaper headlines before the first palace briefing reached her. One front page carried a single photograph of the receiving line beneath the headline. The greeting that never happened. The image spread quickly across television, newspapers, and online discussions. No lengthy explanation seemed necessary. People had seen the moment for themselves. They understood that something far deeper than royal etiquette had taken place. Catherine remained calm as the attention grew. She knew the photograph reflected the decision she had made. She had not argued. She had not caused a public scene. She had simply chosen honesty over appearances. Camilla faced a far more difficult morning. The Queen Consort realized that public discussion had shifted away from questions about Catherine's behavior. Instead, people began asking a different question. What had happened between them that made Catherine choose silence? Television commentators described the Windsor moment as one of the most unforgettable displays of quiet tension seen within the modern royal family. The conversation was no longer centered on protocol. It had become a discussion about trust, dignity, and mutual respect. William found Catherine standing quietly inside Kensington Palace later that morning. He reassured her that people were not responding to controversy alone. They were responding to sincerity. For years, the public had watched Catherine carry out her royal duties with patience, composure, and consistency. Now they had witnessed a woman establishing a personal boundary without raising her voice. Outside Windsor Castle, small groups of visitors gathered throughout the day. Some quietly placed flowers near the gates. Others simply stood in silence, reflecting on the events that had unfolded. The atmosphere remained respectful.
No loud demonstrations. No dramatic scenes.
Only thoughtful conversations about what the moment represented. Camilla also learned about the growing public reaction. She realized the missed greeting had become more than an uncomfortable family incident. It had become a symbol. Catherine never welcomed the attention. William never celebrated the headlines. Camilla never dismissed the public discussion as temporary. Each of them understood that the real answer would not come from newspapers or television reports. It would come from the conversations still waiting to happen behind palace doors. King Charles now faced his most difficult decision. Would he focus only on protecting the royal family's public image? Or would he finally acknowledge the emotional hurt that had quietly led to Windsor? That answer would shape everything that followed. As the day continued, the Windsor event was no longer being discussed as a simple breach of royal etiquette. It had become a defining moment. Not because of loud confrontation, but because of quiet conviction. Catherine understood the weight of what had happened. She never viewed the missed greeting as a victory. There was no satisfaction. Only sadness that the relationship had reached a point where silence felt more honest than polite conversation. Senior palace officials soon began reviewing how similar situations could be avoided in the future. Private discussions focused on strengthening communication between senior members of the royal family before important public engagements. The goal was not to assign blame. It was to rebuild trust before another misunderstanding could unfold before the public. William welcomed those conversations. He believed respect within the family should never depend solely on ceremony or public appearances. It had to begin behind closed doors, long before cameras arrived. Protecting the dignity of the monarchy also meant protecting the people who represented it. Camilla spent much of the afternoon away from public attention. Without making speeches or issuing statements, she quietly reflected on everything that had taken place. She understood that recognition could never be secured simply through rank or royal tradition. True respect grows through understanding. King Charles also accepted that an important lesson had emerged from Windsor. The strength of the monarchy has never rested only on ceremonies, titles, or carefully planned events. It also depends upon trust between the people who carry those responsibilities. Ignoring personal hurt in the hope that it will simply disappear rarely brings lasting peace. Instead, it often returns when least expected. Later that evening, Charles met privately with Catherine once again. This time, the conversation was calmer. He acknowledged that some concerns had remained unresolved for too long. He admitted that silence had not protected the family as he once believed. Instead, it had allowed distance to grow. Catherine appreciated his honesty. She explained that she had never wanted division within the family. Her only wish had been to preserve mutual respect. William remained beside her throughout those conversations. His support never came through dramatic speeches or public gestures. It came through quiet loyalty. Together, William and Catherine showed that dignity does not require conflict. It requires consistency. By the end of the day, everyone closest to the Windsor event understood the same truth. The missed greeting had never been about protocol alone. It had revealed how easily trust can weaken when difficult conversations are left unfinished. And once that trust begins to fade, even the smallest gesture can carry extraordinary meaning. In the end, the Windsor event was remembered for far more than elegant speeches, formal greetings, or carefully planned royal appearances. It became remembered as the day-one quiet decision revealed emotions that had remained hidden for far too long. Catherine never looked at the moment as a personal success. She understood that difficult choices inside a family rarely leave anyone feeling victorious. Instead, she accepted the responsibility that came with protecting her own dignity while continuing to serve the crown. For Camilla, the day ended very differently than it had begun. She entered Windsor expecting another successful royal engagement. She left understanding that public respect cannot be created through ceremony alone. It must be supported by trust behind closed doors. King Charles spent the evening reflecting on everything that had unfolded. As both father and monarch, he realized that preserving the image of unity was no longer enough. True unity required honest communication. It required listening before misunderstandings became public moments. William remained beside Catherine throughout the final hours of the day. He never encouraged confrontation. He never sought public attention. His support came through quiet loyalty, the same loyalty that had defined every important decision they had faced together. For Catherine, that meant more than any public statement ever could. In the days that followed, senior palace officials quietly reviewed internal communication surrounding major royal engagements. The objective was simple. Future family concerns should be addressed privately before they ever reached public view. No official announcement was needed. The lesson had already been learned. King Charles privately assured Catherine that her concerns had been heard. She thanked him respectfully. There were no dramatic speeches.
No emotional confrontation.
Only a shared understanding that some wounds cannot heal unless they are first acknowledged. Camilla also accepted that certain relationships cannot be repaired through protocol alone. Respect cannot be requested. It must be earned through patience, understanding, and genuine trust. By the time the Windsor story slowly faded from the headlines, one message remained clear. Catherine had not walked past Camilla to create division. She had quietly drawn a personal boundary after carrying disappointment for far too long. That single moment changed how many people viewed not only the Windsor event, but also the importance of honesty inside the royal family. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss another royal update. We'll see you in the next video.